Hello everyone, this is Alex and we are doing A Little Life by Hanya Yanigahara. Now, this video is going to be the first in a series called First Impressions, and the reason it's going to be First Impressions is because I have not read the book yet. In fact, I haven't even read the first page. Now, so far on this channel we've had Blood Meridian, which I've read to death. I did Dostoevsky at one point, which we will do more of in the future because there is a lot of demand, which I've also read to death. But I would not like this to be a niche kind of channel. I want it to be general, and I'm actually looking at books that people frequently discuss or look at. A Little Life is very famous. It came out in 2016. It is a very new novel, especially one that has a Man Booker seal on it. This is a finalist for the Man Booker Prize, or rather the Booker one. No, Man Booker, yeah. Which is as good as winning. I mean, these awards are so prestigious. Some of the most important books I've ever read have been finalists for this, that, or the other. If you even get considered in that circle, you have already accomplished something. Now, why are we doing a first impressions of this book? Why am I not simply reading it and then just telling you everything about it? I think that's the point. I see, as time goes on, people are kind of lost as far as what books to read, how do I get into books, how do I consider books. There's a cafe I go to, and I always see people reading in there, just alone, which is very sad. And the books they're reading are invariably the books that are on the shelf in the very front of the major bookstores, which I won't name. The most high-profile books, Atomic Habits is one. Everybody reads that book. I haven't read it. I don't know what it's about. They read all these typical authors. Colleen Hoover, I see very frequently. Just say nothing about either of those books or that author. But it's simply, you can tell they're just picking off the shelf, which shows two issues, in my view. Number one, they don't know where to look. And number two, they don't even necessarily know why they're reading what they're reading. They're just reading this kind of general, consumer-oriented kind of reading material. Is that bad? Absolutely not. And in fact, at book by book, I would argue, once again, like I say in the introduction video, there's no such thing as a bad book. There are only books that were not properly introduced. And I never understand critics or people who are saying, well, I don't like the book for this reason, or I don't like it for that reason. Because you can like or not like a book for any reason at all. The author was not thinking about you when they were writing it. So you have to look at a book as material, something that you're going to look into and that you're going to learn something from. But what you learn cannot be determined. You have to think about the book as its own separate thing, this other, if you would. And you're going to become more familiar with this thing as time goes on, even to the extent where, for example, The Brothers Karamazov is recommended to people. So many times people go on the internet, go on review sites and say, I'm 130 pages in. It's that 130, I think that might be the first couple books, that 130, where they say they've only been introducing characters. We haven't even gotten to the book. And as someone who has read it 3 times and devoted much of my life to studying it, I can tell you those 130 pages are crucial to understanding everything in the book, and they are some of the most important 130 pages that you will ever read. Most people are not aware of this, and they do need guidance about it. This is my general plan for the first impressions video about A Little Life. I don't know anything about this novel. In fact, I would like it to stay that way. I think literature written in the 1980s, 90s, 2000s, and the 2010s, and now into the 2020s, I think that you cannot scrutinize it too much. I think with books like we've seen coming out, you need to give them time. Some of the exceptions, and to name them now that we're here, the books that I think about when I'm looking just at the outside of this book, the books I think about are American Psycho, Infinite Jest, what else? Perks of Being a Wallflower, definitely. Even Underworld by Dawn DeLillo. I think this is a New York novel, among other things. It's one of the first things you read in the synopsis, which we'll get to. This is not to pin it down to that genre, which again is completely arbitrary. It's going to be a book taking place in New York, which is a very special setting for any kind of book. New York will be almost a character in the book. You cannot avoid it. If you set a book in New York and you don't acknowledge the city, then it's almost missing something. It's a unique place. It's an old style world city. It's got so much history. It's got the installations, the monuments in New York. the way life works there is very unique. It's got the top and the bottom of society. Everything can happen. Again, I mentioned Underworld by Don DeLillo as if to show you New York occupies the top of the atmosphere down to the bottom rungs of hell, just as kind of to background this book. So this is not to hold a little life to that standard. It's to simply help us understand and have a starting point from this book. The other thing I will say before we go into it, and by the way, all I'm going to do is read the outside material, read the introductory material like the reviews, the chapter titles, and then we'll do a few pages just to see what it is we should be thinking about and how we should be advancing through this book. But what I'll say is, with this type of book, in books that come out, again, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it is no longer necessarily a thing to write a book based on these kind of macroscopic drama. What I mean is, like, for example, it's not like the Aeneid anymore. Aeneas was a fugitive of Troy. He carried his father on his back out of there. He's going to found a city. It's not these things influencing people from the outside. We're no longer looking at this kind of real world where it's just large pieces jostling each other around. After James Joyce, after even Hemingway, we are now living in a point in literature that is the psychological fiction, the psychological literature. The world occurs from inside of here, no matter how you slice it. We cannot escape that anymore. And I think that's how books will continue to be written, because it is, in many ways, the only experience that will exist, and anymore, as far as we'd like to acknowledge. It is the only experience that has currency across a large group of people. It is the only experience that has any validity or verity to it. It is the only thing that we can truly say, our experience of things, the interiority, the sense of isolation, our history described in a psychological manner, to the point where you can even step over lines, you can step on toes, and it still has psychological, emotional, and ultimately reality in the truth. So, for example, the great line from Ulysses by James Joyce, which might have been the original deliberately psychological novel. I believe there are many before him that did it, and I think they inspired him directly. But as time goes on, the line from Stephen Dedalus when he says, "History is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake." It is a nightmare. It is the stuff of the inner mind, and that is how we are experiencing things in the real world. So unfortunately, the world is not a stage that we're watching. We're on the stage, and the spotlight is on you, no matter how it is. So what this does is it just changes our focus of how are we perceiving this story? Is it a bunch of people on the stage and we're watching what they're doing? It's not that anymore. It's you. You are the star, and this drama that's happening in your mind. And so maybe the characters, the drama that we're looking at is within them. It is within the mind, and it is also, how does that experience, or how do we sound out the value of what they're going through based on our own experiences? It is a sort of psychological, almost telepathy, if you would, which sounds crazy, but what it means is we are communicating psychological set pieces. We are communicating experiences, emotions that have, in many ways, more truth than even these abstract principles and ideas that have formed throughout the course of history. I mentioned American Psycho because it is perhaps a strictly psychological novel. Bret Easton Ellis even mentions he himself was not sure what was actually happening to Bateman or not. Bateman's kind of schizophrenia, if you would, his inability to differentiate the real world from the emotional life, is supposed to be almost symptomatic, or it's supposed to be something that we share in common with him. I mentioned Infinite Jest because it's one of the great celebrated great novels that we can even recognize within the late lifetime of the author. And it is a novel about the psychological experience. Hal and Cadenza is the main character. There's many main characters. And the issue has nothing to do with his material life or what's going on. It just seems to be an explication of what is happening within him and what he is experiencing. The author rattles off traumatic information about the characters' lives almost as supplementary to what is actually happening. This is the background for me getting into a little life. Underworld by DeLillo, I think, is something I won't go into for now, but it is something that I am thinking about, and I'm not going to be married to it while I'm looking at this novel, but it's simply something that will be in the back of my mind. Now, just looking at this, there's a famous photo by Peter Hujar. Is that how you say his name? It says copyrighted 1987. That's when it was, I believe that's when he died, and that's when the photograph became a part of the LLC or something. This was taken in 1969. People say that this is Jim Carrey. It's not. It's just, I think it might be the photographer. I don't know. That's all I know. I just happen to know some about photographers. This is the kind of material I like for a paperback. I hate to do like a book review, but this kind of, you hear that? Yeah, that's nice. It's tough. It's already wrinkling on the back because I don't take care of books, but great material, very tough. I'm going to look at the back now. We have a review from the Wall Street Journal. Catch my breath. Remarkable, an epic study of trauma and friendship. Oh boy, written with such intelligence and depth of perception that it will be one of the benchmarks against which all other novels that broach those subjects, and they are legion, will be measured. A Little Life announces Yanigahara as a major American novelist. That's saying quite a lot. It's calling her an American novelist. And I looked it up. She is American. But writing about the American experience, especially, this is, again, a New York novel, is something that I don't see happening very much anymore. The experience of characters in fiction novels now seems to be a bit more particular. It's almost a bit worldly in the sense that they're not tied to their location, their geography. And so it won't simply be the fact that it takes place in America, but that the subjects and that the themes are going to be American. I can see already the pursuit of dreams against our current personal struggles. That's one of the most American things. We have this dream, we're going to make it big. And so whatever I'm going through right now, like, I work at a bar and I work at a fucking shoe store or something, right now, but one day I'm going to make it big. Very American, very LA, very New York. Then we have the synopsis. It says, A Little Life follows 4 college classmates broke adrift and buoyed only by their friendship and ambition as they move to New York in search of fame and fortune, the American novel. While their relationships, which are tinged by addiction, success, and pride, deepen over the decades, the men are held together by their devotion to the brilliant, enigmatic Jude, a man scarred by an unspeakable childhood trauma, a hymn to brotherly bonds, and a masterful depiction of love in the 21st century. Hanya Yanigahara's stunning novel is about the families we are born into and those that we make for ourselves. You can already see just how incredibly current and how incredibly urgent this kind of a story is. We see people searching for fame or searching for something greater than what they've been born into. You see this in all of the social movements in America, at least especially after 2010, with the eruption of identity politics, with this articulation of sexuality and gender, people who are trying to transcend their origins in ways that we haven't seen before. Not in simply like this epic, material kind of way, but in this personal, this spiritual, and this absolute kind of way. What else? This idea that their experience, the story itself, is inseparable from, as it says here, the trauma that people have suffered in their lives. You cannot factor this out of people's experiences anymore in the context of literary fiction. The things that created us, our origins, are in many ways something that we can never escape. And so it's what kind of headway can we make in regard to that? How can we fight the grain in the most authentic way that we can to try to become something more? And again, it smacks of four men who are trying to make up for something that they feel is not there, something that they feel they do not have, trying to find something and become something that is meaningful. Beneath the synopsis, we have more reviews. A guy named Edmund White, I don't know who that is. Utterly gripping, wonderfully romantic, and sometimes harrowing. A Little Life kept me reading late into the night, night after night. Lovely. New Yorker, elemental, irreducible. I hope so. A little kerosene might disagree. The Washington Post says, drawn in extraordinary detail by incantatory prose, affecting and transcendent. Well, it better be it better be transcendent then. $18, good Lord, for a paperback. The world we live in. More reviews on the inside, lovely. Winner of the Kirkus Prize, one of the best books of the year, according to all these very important publications. There's more reviews just on the inside, exceedingly good. Thank you, Newsweek. Spellbinding every time. There's always someone saying that. Again, the Spectator says Yanigahara achieves great psychological realism. Little Life seems to levitate out of history, edging towards the mythic or incredible. This is why I think about these books that I mentioned, American Psycho, Infinite Jest. It is a psychological story, and it is a form of, again, it's psychological realism, which is looking for the reasons about why things happen, based on our experiences, our traumas, our fears and hopes that are being explored through the characters. And so, again, becoming something mythical, becoming something incredible by having this kind of transcendent truth within it that you can refer to through any example, or that rather has currency outside of the narrative or outside of its place in history, which is, again, a literary achievement. So just without even looking at the first page, we can at least see, based on these reviews, that there is significant validity and there's verity to it being award worthy. It is achieved something that is transcendent and that can be read across time with great success and can continue to pad the books for anchor books well into the future. 2015, I'm sorry. Anything else? Nope. To Jared Holt, In Friendship with Love. That's the dedication. Now looking at the contents, we have Chapter 1, Lisbonard Street. Chapter 2, The Postman. Chapter 3, Vanities. Chapter 4, The Axiom of Equality. Chapter 5, The Happy Years. Chapter 6, Dear Comrade. And then finally, Chapter 7 is also named Lisbonard Street. So I think we're supposed to be coming full circle in this book. These chapters, by the way, are differentiated by 92 pages, by about 150 pages, by about 100. Yeah, so these chapters are quite vast. It is one of those, if you will. The size of the novel itself is not daunting. It's a long one, but we're going to judge by the prose whether that's going to be daunting or not. So we're starting on Chapter 1, Lisbonard Street. We're going to go through the first page, or maybe a few pages, just to get an idea for what it's like, until I think that we've done quite enough. To start, the 11th apartment had only one closet, but it did have a sliding glass door that opened onto a small balcony from which he could see a man sitting across the way, outdoors in only a t-shirt and shorts, even though it was October, smoking. Willem held up a hand in greeting to him, but the man didn't wave back. Incredible. This kind of little experience here in the very beginning. You're in this terrible little apartment. It did have a sliding glass door and one tiny balcony. And again, if this is in New York or if it's in Brooklyn, which I don't know if it is yet, you can just imagine the scene. And you wave at a guy it just doesn't even care. He's not dressed for the weather, which references another book that I'm about to mention. And he's smoking, and the guy doesn't wave back at you. He doesn't care. You're trying to make this statement, this happy connection with the world, and it's not working out. What I mean is the other book that starts with people who are not properly dressed for the weather is The Idiot by Dostoevsky. The first thing we learn about the main two characters is that one of them is dressed for Russia and the other one is not. Going on in the book, in the bedroom, Jude was accordioning the closet door, opening and shutting it when Willem came in. There's only one closet, he said, so they're coming here for the first time. That's okay, Willem said. I have nothing to put in it anyway. A statement of what they possess. I mean, I don't need to say this out loud, but I'm explicating it. Neither do I. They smiled at each other. The agent from the building wandered in after them. We'll take it, Jude told her. I think that's so sweet. These people come in, and they acknowledge this apartment is too small. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. I don't have anything, so it'll be completely fine. This, to me, communicates, and I mean, we're not even halfway through the first page, this idea that these two characters, the only ones we've met so far, don't really need anything in life. And they smile, saying that they don't have anything. And they don't need anything, and they have nowhere to put anything. It seems to be okay, and I think it's a very sweet idea. Why? Because they seem to only need themselves, or again, each other. But back at the agent's office, they were told they couldn't rent the apartment after all. Why not? Jude asked her. You don't make enough to cover 6 months' rent, and you don't have anything in savings, said the agent, suddenly terse. She had checked their credit and their bank accounts, and at last realized that there was something amiss about the two men in their 20s who were not a couple and yet were trying to rent a one-bedroom apartment on a dull but expensive stretch of 25th Street. Do you have anyone who can sign on as your guarantor, a boss, parents? Our parents are dead, said Willem swiftly. The agent sighed. Then I suggest you lower your expectations. No one who manages a well-run building is going to rent to candidates with your financial profile. And then she stood with an air of finality and looked pointedly at the door. When they told JB and Malcolm this, however, they made it into a comedy. The apartment floor became tattooed with mouse droppings. The man across the way had almost exposed himself. The agent was upset because she had been flirting with Willem and he hadn't reciprocated. I think that's funny. You didn't get it, so you make up all this stuff to make it sound like it wasn't worth it anyway. The way that this is being stated so far is so plain and so candid that it has a lot of kind of power to it. I think the prose is very punctual. I think it's very well crafted, and it doesn't have that kind of casualness that I don't like in a lot of fiction narratives where it just sounds like, the author is talking to you, which is fine if you're good at writing, but if you're not, it's just annoying. This is good prose. It is proper, and it is getting the point across with authority. It is not compromising on its own quality. Who wants to live on 25th and 2nd anyway, asked JB. Everyone. They were at let me get this right. Pho Viet Hung in Chinatown. Nice. I think I've been somewhere like that. Where they met twice a month for dinner. Pho Viet Hung wasn't very good. The pho was curiously sugary, the lime juice was soapy, and at least one of them got sick after every meal. A proper Vietnamese experience. I'm just kidding. I love Vietnamese. But they kept coming both out of habit and necessity. You could get a bowl of soup or a sandwich at Pho Viet Hung for $5, or you could get an entree, which were $8 to $10, but much larger, so you could save half of it for the next day or for a snack later that night. Only Malcolm never ate the whole of his entree and never saved the other half either. And when he was finished eating, he put his plate in the center of the table so Willem and JB, who were always hungry, could eat the rest. It's for people who look out for one another. And we're thinking about portions. We're thinking about what can I do with this food. I can't explain to you how American this is. I got what did I do? I went to the supermarket the other day and I got a tray, I didn't feel like cooking. I just got a tray of that supermarket fried chicken or something. And the cashier, the guy was like, "Oh, I love this. I make it last 3 days." And I'm like, you make this $6 plate of chicken last 3 days. It's very it's very dismal. I feel bad for people here. But it's such an American thing. I mean, we can afford, in America, you get a house, you get a car, you get the latest iPhone, but that is about it. I mean, even growing up in this ritzy town that I grew up in, some of my friends' dads were the CEOs of this, that, or the other, or one of the guys, there were actors from my town, famous actors from my town. But my friends would come to school with a cheese stick and crackers, or a hot dog and some pickles or something. They just didn't eat. And I don't know why, if it's a habit of the way their parents grew up or what, but crazy. Of course, we don't want to live at 25th and 2nd, JB, said Willem patiently, but we don't really have a choice. We don't have any money, remember? I don't understand why you don't stay where you are, said Malcolm, who was now pushing his mushrooms and tofu. He always ordered the same dish, oyster mushrooms and braised tofu, in a triolically brown sauce around his plate as Willem and JB eyed it. Well, I can't, Willem said. Remember? He had to have explained this to Malcolm a dozen times in the last 3 months. Merritt's boyfriend's moving in, so I have to move out. But why do you have to move out? Because it's Merritt's name on the lease, Malcolm, said JB. Oh, Malcolm said. He was quiet. He often forgot what he considered inconsequential details, but he also never seemed to mind when people grew impatient with him for forgetting. Right. The psychological realism here is so strong. We have interior monologues, or a description of their interior lives. Again, this thing about not being able to find a proper place to live. I cannot tell you how American that is. I've heard some of the weirdest stuff. I knew someone who was it? He lived in the South, and he like left his parents' house and he like paid rent unofficially somewhere, and he just like couch surfed for like 2 years. He got away with it, and then eventually he was like, okay, well, for whatever reason he couldn't do it anymore, and he had to move back in with his parents. And this is so typical. I mean, this guy was my age, and how old am I? 30? Yeah, and he was like 20, 26, 27 when he was doing that. I can't stay at your place forever, Malcolm. Your parents are going to kill me at some point. My parents love you. That's nice of you to say, but they won't if I don't move out, and soon. Malcolm was the only one of the four of them who lived at home, and as JB liked to say, if he had Malcolm's home, he would live at home too. It wasn't as if Malcolm's house was particularly grand. It was, in fact, creaky and ill-kept, and Willem had once gotten a splinter simply by running his hand up its banister. But it was large, a real Upper East Side townhouse. Malcolm's sister Flora, who was 3 years older than him, had moved out of the basement apartment recently, and Jude had taken her place as a short-term solution. Eventually, Malcolm's parents would want to reclaim the unit to convert it into offices for his mother's literary agency, which meant Jude, who was finding the flight of stairs that led down to it too difficult to navigate anyway, had to look for his own apartment. And it was natural that he would live with Willem. They had been roommates throughout college. In their first year, the four of them had shared a space that consisted of a cinder-blocked common room where sat their desks and chairs and a couch that JB's aunts had driven up in a U-Haul, in a second, far tinier room in which 2 sets of bunk beds had been placed. This room had been so narrow that Malcolm and Jude, lying in the bottom bunks, could reach out and grab each other's hands. Malcolm and JB had shared one of the units. Jude and Willem had shared the other. An absolute bro hangout. Cinder blocks and bunk beds. What's that meme? It's like, man, women hate how much, how little it takes for men to have. I don't stand by that statement. I just think it's funny. It's blacks versus whites, JB would say. Jude's not white, Willem would respond. I'm not black, Malcolm would add, more to annoy JB than because he believed it. Well, JB said now, pulling the plate of mushrooms toward him with the tines of his fork. A tine, is that the thing of the fork? I've never known that. The teeth, I thought it was. I'd say you could both stay with me, but I think you'd fucking hate it. JB lived in a massive, filthy loft in Little Italy. Sounds fantastic. Full of strange hallways that led to unused, oddly shaped cul-de-sacs and unfinished half-rooms, the sheetrock abandoned mid-construction, which belonged to another person they knew from college. Ezra was an artist, a bad one, but he didn't need to be good because, as JB liked to remind them, he would never have to work in his entire life. And not only would he never have to work, but his children's children's children would never have to work. They could make bad, unsaleable, worthless art for generations, and they would still be able to buy at whim the best oils they wanted and impractically large lofts in downtown Manhattan that they could trash with their bad architectural decisions. And when they got sick of the artist's life, as JB was convinced Ezra someday would, all they would need to do is call their trust officers and be awarded an enormous lump sum of cash of an amount that the four of them, well, maybe not Malcolm, could never dream of seeing in their lifetimes. In the meantime, though, Ezra was a useful person to know, not only because he let JB and a few of his other friends from school stay in his apartment. At any time, there were 4 or 5 people burrowing in various corners of the loft, but because he was a good-natured and basically generous person and liked to throw excessive parties in which copious amounts of food and drugs and alcohol were available for free. This reminds me of something like a Balzac novel or something like La Père Goriot, where it's talking about these people's financial situations and kind of the life they have to live based on that. And it is always incredible to me, reading the greatest novelists of the 19th century, of even the early 20th, just how little things really do change over time, and the capitalist realities of the early 1800s. If you read Jane Austen, if you read Balzac, it's the same issue. I mean, La Père Goriot is, I think at one point, mentions like, is that the one where the owner of the apartments there is like telling him like, okay, is that the right one? It's like, okay, you can either work your ass off and become a lawyer. You could be the best lawyer in Paris. It doesn't matter. You'd be making $50,000 a year, but you would be working your ass off. You'd go to school. You'd have to pass the bar. You'd have to be the best, and you'd be shouting for people. You'd be representing people every day. And you'd still only be making up to a set amount. Or you could go down the hall and you can woo this very rich daughter of this magnate, and you would have so much money you couldn't imagine it for the rest of your life for almost nothing. And it seems to be like we have the exact same relationship here. We have these 4 friends eating at this very economical Vietnamese place in Little China, or in Chinatown there, in Manhattan, I believe. And they are they can't even, they're thinking about what they're going to do with their leftovers. Like, can this feed me tomorrow? They can't even get an apartment. Their credit and their checking accounts are not even what am I trying to say? They can't be availed in any way. And they don't even seem to care. They're just laughing it off. Whereas at the same time, they have this friend, Ezra, who has this ridiculously huge trust account that it's almost pointless. It's pointless to be upset about this condition because it is so absurd. The difference between someone who has everything and then a number of people who have nothing. The difference is like whose name is on a piece of paper, essentially. And it's funny that this Ezra person chooses to live in this pointless state of poverty simply to do it, simply because it sounds interesting, when in reality, at any point, they could give it up, get their cash, and just go kill themselves on drugs anywhere in the world. And again, as if to emphasize, as if to show the absurdity, they have these parties where people just do drugs and drink all the time anyway. And it paints such a vivid picture, I think, of where we are in at least American history. I can't say for other countries, but it is so typical. Hold up, JB said, putting his chopsticks down. I just realized there's someone at the magazine renting some place for her aunt, like just on the verge of Chinatown. How much is it? Asked Willem. Probably nothing. She didn't even know what to ask for it, and she wants someone in there that she knows. Do you think you could put in a good word? Better. I'll introduce you. Can you come by the office tomorrow? Jude sighed. I won't be able to get away. He looked at Willem. Don't worry, I can. What time? Lunchtime, I guess. 1? I'll be there. Willem was still hungry, but he let JB eat the rest of the mushrooms. Then they all waited around for a bit. Sometimes Malcolm ordered jackfruit ice cream, the one consistently good thing on the menu, ate 2 bites, and then stopped, and he and JB would finish the rest. But this time he didn't order the ice cream, and so they asked for the bill so they could study it and divide it to the dollar. Now, normally they're giving things out to each other, and normally they are letting one another finish their food. Here in this kind of last meal together, we don't see that happening quite as like it was just described. And I think that's where I'll stop, because beyond this, I don't really know what else to say, but we can see in the very beginning of this book, again, we're looking at the interior lives of these people. We're looking at this absurd environment they're living in. This person who wants to rent them out the apartment, she doesn't even know what to ask for it. You can really feel that these people are going to have some authorship, some authority over their future. Is that the authority that they want? Is their role in their future, whether it's collective or individual, is this going to have the character that they're expecting? And at this point in the book, it doesn't sound like they have much in the way of expectations for their futures. So the reader can immediately find common ground with these characters. So I, the reader, and then the 4 of them together, among the 5 of us, we don't know what's going to happen. And yet we can feel this intensity and this vivacity in these people, that in spite of having this terrible condition that they're inheriting, they don't have hope, but they have grit about it, if you would. They seem to be accepting it, especially when it says, one of them just lives in a basement, a townhome. They used to live in, cinder block units. It's just funny. And it's very identifiable. People my age, especially from my generation, can immediately identify with this. We came from very affluent families, but for whatever reason, even with help, it's hard to even live in a proper place. A couple of my friends went to go live in South America, and even their situation there was very precarious for a long time. They had great jobs, a lot going on, but it's difficult, very difficult. I knew people who lived in Manhattan, who worked on Wall Street, and they had to either live in New Jersey or they could barely afford to even live there, even though they were working these very high profile jobs. So this is something that people up and down the payroll can identify with significantly, is this struggle, this absurd struggle. And whereas most people are trying to figure out like if these leftovers can feed me tomorrow, at the same time they're occupying the same space and even the same frame of mind as someone who, like this Ezra character, has limitless cash at their fingertips. It paints a very fascinating picture, and I would absolutely love to see the rest of it. So the point of this video is generally to start us out on this novel. How are we to consider it? How are we to get into it? And hopefully, if I see someone reading this at the cafe again, they're going to have a lot more insight and a lot more comfort with the book. We're going to do more first impression videos like this in the future, simply because I find these very interesting. I don't know what the books are about. I don't know what it's going to tell us. It's a little bit more bracing than me just sitting there and lecturing you about it. And hopefully it does have participation with the viewer, because ultimately these are my impressions of the book. I don't have any authority to offer about this book. And again, even the books that I recommend in relation to it are tenuous. It's just simply what I'm thinking about when I mention American Psycho, Infinite Jest, Underworld. Possibly Sally Rooney, if you want to go there, but I think her novels are a bit even unique compared to this. Generally, thanks so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful or fun, and please keep reading.